This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
I posed this question to anyone who was around. Do you remember what you were doing in 1984? Well, for me, heading into a much anticipated summer vacation after passing the 5th grade and hoping the summer would practically last forever. Back then, a loaf of bread cost 59 cents. A gallon of gas was $1.13 per gallon. The top movies that summer were Gremlins, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Purple Rain, and Ghostbusters, and everyone was jamming to Prince and the Revolution with their mega hit When Doves Cry or Kenny Loggins' title song from the movie Footloose. The reason why I'm feeling so nostalgic about the summer of 1984 when yours truly were a mere 11 years old is what's going on in sports. This past NBA Finals, the Boston Celtics claimed championship banner number 18, beating the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA Finals in 5 games. Meanwhile, in the NHL, the Edmonton Oilers were looking to bring Lord Stanley's Cup back to Canada for the first time in 31 years in unbelievable historic fashion. The Oilers spotted the Florida Panthers a 3-0 lead in the series and rallied to tie the series at 3 games apiece in the Stanley Cup Finals, only to fall short in Game 7 in Florida. The Oilers were trying to equal the feat of the 1942 Toronto Maple Leafs, which came back from down 3-0 against the Detroit Red Wings to win the Cup. In 1984, both the Celtics and Oilers in the NBA and NHL respectively each won the league championship during that late spring and early summer, but unfortunately fell short of both repeating sports history. Hello once again, I'm Dana Augusta, your host of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, the sports history podcast you didn't know you needed, as we give you the best of sports from back in the day. In this edition of the podcast, we will take a trip back to the late spring of 1984 and revisit the NBA and Stanley Cup Finals of that year. In the NBA, the Boston Celtics were back in the finals for the first time in 3 years, led by that year's league MVP Larry Bird. Yet standing in the way was the Celtics' ancient rival, the Los Angeles Lakers, and Bird's personal rival, Magic Johnson, in their first ever meeting in the finals. Meanwhile, over in the NHL, there was another rivalry that was being renewed. The young, aggressive Edmonton Oilers, led by scoring phenom Wayne Gretzky, were in the Stanley Cup Finals for the 2nd consecutive season, looking to topple the current cup holders, the New York Islanders, who had won the previous 5 Stanley Cup titles. Edmonton's win over the Isles would not only end the Long Island stranglehold on the Stanley Cup, but it would begin their own championship dynasty. Meanwhile, something happened in baseball that hadn't happened in 100 years. The San Diego Padres utility player Tupaquita Marcano was banned for life for gambling on baseball, more specifically, betting on his team while he was a member of the Pittsburgh Pirates organization. He's the first player banned for life from baseball because of gambling since Jimmy O'Connell in 1924. We will detail the story of O'Connell and a New York Giants outfielder and his dubious actions during the National League pennant chase a century ago. And since the NBA Finals are now history, I would like to send a shout out to one of the greatest NBA Finals that included one of the greatest NBA Finals games ever. 50 years ago, the Boston Celtics and the Milwaukee Bucks met in the finals with Hall of Famers seemingly everywhere. The series went a grueling 7 games, yet it would be the double overtime classic of Game 6 that ranks as one of the greatest NBA Finals games ever. It sounds like we have a good show and a lot going on in this all-new edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, a member of the Sports History Network. When you think of sports in the 1980s, there are several teams that come to mind. Maybe you think of the Showtime Lakers with Magic, Kareem, and the crew, or maybe the Chicago Bears and their Super Bowl shuffle, or perhaps the San Francisco 49ers and the genius of Bill Walsh and the cool of Joe Montana. Yet, two other teams were just as identifiable with the decade of the 1980s as those others. The Boston Celtics and the Edmonton Oilers were dominant teams in the decade of excess, as the Celtics won 3 titles in the decade with Larry Bird, Robert Parrish, and Kevin McHale. Meanwhile, north of the border, the Edmonton Oilers, led by Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier, and Grant Fuhr in goal, ended the New York Islander dynasty and started their own, winning 5 Stanley Cups in the space of 7 years. However, in the year of 1984, both of these teams reached the promised land in their respective leagues, with the Celtics once again beating the Los Angeles Lakers for their 15th NBA title overall and the second in the decade. And up in Edmonton, the Oilers dethroned the 4-time Stanley Cup champion New York Islanders for their first ever Stanley Cup title. Over in the NBA, the Boston Celtics were coming off of a subpar season in 1983, looking to rebound with first-year head coach and former Celtic Casey Jones. Paced by the all-around play of Larry Bird, who captured MVP honors that season, the Celtics breezed through the Eastern Conference that season with a 62-20 record. The regular season of 1984 was also memorable for several different reasons. David Stern will replace Larry O'Brien as the league's commissioner, and it would mark the first year that the first round of the NBA playoffs would be extended to a best 3 out of 5 series instead of the previous best 2 out of 3. The Dallas Mavericks and the Utah Jazz would make the postseason for the first time ever. The Clippers would end their stay in San Diego and move to Los Angeles. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar would pass Wilt Chamberlain for the all-time scoring record. In the postseason, the Celtics swept the then Washington Bullets in 3 games, then outlasted a very tough New York Knicks team led by Bernard King in 7 grueling games. In the conference finals, the Celtics defeated Sidney Moncrief and the Milwaukee Bucks in 5 games to return to the finals for the first time since 1981, when they defeated Moses Malone and the Houston Rockets for the title. Now, waiting for them in the finals was their long, ancient rival, the Los Angeles Lakers, who had been in the last 2 NBA finals. In 1984, the Lakers were still smarting from their final sweep at the hands of the Philadelphia 76ers and Moses Malone with Julius Erving, and they returned to the NBA Finals with a vengeance. The Lakers, of course, powered by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who, as I mentioned earlier, broke the NBA's all-time scoring record, and Magic Johnson with his 13.1 assists per game, which led the league in '84. They ended up going 54-28. In the playoffs, the Lakers defeated the Kansas City Kings in the first round, then the upstart Dallas Mavericks in the second round. Over in the Western Conference Finals, the Lakers outlasted the Phoenix Suns to advance to the finals against the Celtics in what many sports writers at the time called the greatest NBA Finals in history. Now, this would be the first time Magic and Larry would meet in the NBA Finals, and after the series was over, many people doing the aftermath would call this 7-game war the best NBA Finals of the decade. As someone who had lived through and watched every game of this NBA final, it seemed like every game was epic. Every game had subplots. Everything from the heat of the Boston Garden with no air conditioning to the clothesline of Kurt Rambis to the trash talking of Larry Bird. This series had everything. It was the first time that the Lakers and the Celtics would meet in the finals since 1969, which was also memorable because that one also went 7 games with Hall of Famer Bill Russell running off the court into the sunset in his final game with game ball in hand, as well as his 11th NBA title in 13 years. Russell's Celtics had defeated the Lakers in the NBA Finals 7 times over the years, and in 1984, the Lakers were looking to turn the tables on the Celtics. And it certainly looked that way in Game 1. The Lakers scored 52 points off the Lakers' famed Showtime fast break and ran the Celtics right off of the renowned parquet floor of the Boston Garden and claimed a 115-109 win. Kareem led all scorers for 32 points with 8 rebounds. And for the Celtics, Kevin McHale was the high point man with 25 points, while Larry Bird only finished with 14. In Game 2, the Lakers stuck with the script that got them to the Game 1 win, pushing the ball up the court with Magic Johnson leading the way. However, the game and possibly even the series turned on one play late in Game 2. With the Lakers leading 113 to 111 and with less than a minute to play, the Lakers were looking to run some time off the clock and they inbounded the ball to James Worthy, who attempted a pass back to Magic, but his pass was intercepted by Celtics reserve guard Gerald Henderson, and he scored on an easy layup to tie the game at 113. Then the Lakers inbounded the ball, and Magic, who was trying to set up a play, inexplicably dribbled out the clock without getting a shot off, sending the Game 2 into overtime. In the extra session, the game remained close. With 14 seconds remaining, the Celtics down 1. Celtics swingman Scott Wedman connected on a shot from the baseline with 14 seconds remaining to give Boston a 1-point lead. Then on the ensuing possession, center Robert Parrish stole the ball on defense. And then from there, Larry Bird would hit a pair of free throws to give the Celtics a 124-121 win to even the series at 1 game apiece. Larry Bird would lead the Celtics with 27 points and 13 rebounds. The scene would shift now to Inglewood, California for Game 3. Magic would record an NBA Finals record 21 assists as the Lakers raced to an easy 137-104 win, the worst loss in Celtic postseason history to this point. But the story of the game actually came afterwards. In the Celtic locker room, Larry Bird addressed reporters, and in an attempt to possibly light a fire under his teammates, he said that the team played like, quote, sissies. Heading back into Game 4, back at the Forum, the question swirled in pregame. Would Bird's quotes in Game 3 in fact fire up his squad? Well, midway through the first half, everyone got their answer. In one of the most famous, or infamous, hard fouls in NBA Finals history, on a breakaway play, Kurt Rambis was clotheslined by Kevin McHale, prompting a small dust-up between the teams. Tempers continued to get heated as Kareem and Larry Bird got into a heated exchange and had to be separated by teammates, yet the game came down to the end of regulation. The Lakers were holding a 5-point lead with less than a minute to play, but committed several unforced errors, which included a bad pass from Magic that wound up in the hands of center Robert Parrish. The Celtics took full advantage of the Lakers' miscues and forced overtime. In the overtime period, Larry Bird would drain a clutch jump shot with 16 seconds left. Then ML Carr would steal the inbounds pass coming out of a timeout and dunked it on the other end to seal the 129-125 win. In a quick postscript to this game, this would be the last NBA Finals to go to overtime until Game 2 of the 1990 NBA Finals, when the Portland Trail Blazers defeated the Detroit Pistons 106-105 at the Palace of Auburn Hills. Bird would finish that game with 29 points, while Kareem led all scorers with 32 points in the loss. With the series tied at 2 games apiece, the series returned to Boston and the sweltering Boston Garden. Forever known as the Heat game, with Boston Garden famously known without air conditioning, the game was played under 97-degree heat. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar needed an oxygen tank on the sidelines. Referee Hugh Evans became dehydrated and fainted during the first half. But while the Celtics flourished at home in the extreme heat, the Lakers wilted and relinquished the series lead 3-2 with a 121-103 win, as Larry Bird, beginning to put his imprint on the series, led all scorers with 34 points and 17 rebounds. The Celtics were now 1 win away from the NBA title, their second in 4 seasons and their 15th overall. Yet, the Lakers certainly had other ideas. The Lakers would even the series at 3 with a 119-109 win, as the Lakers answered the Celtics' rough tactics, most notably when Cedric Maxwell was pushed into the basket support by James Worthy. Kareem finished with 30 points in the win, forcing a Game 7 back in Boston. In Game 7, the heat in Boston Garden was not as prevalent. The temperature was just hovering right around 91 degrees. Not too bad. Even though the Celtics had Bird, McHale, and Parrish, What is considered the greatest frontline in NBA history, the hero of the 1981 finals, Cedric Maxwell, was the key element for the Celtics in Game 7. Maxwell finished with 24 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists as the Celtics celebrated their 15th NBA title, beating the Lakers once again 111-102. This was the 8th time in Celtics and Lakers had matched up in the finals, and with the Celtics winning each time. And this was the first time since 1966 that the Celtics won the title at home. More on the Celtics winning a championship on the road in the finals later in this podcast. While the Celtics were the past dynasty looking to reclaim their place atop of the NBA, over in the National Hockey League, the Edmonton Oilers were poised to end the Long Island hockey dynasty, which were in the hands of the New York Islanders. Now, if there was a team that was poised to end the Islanders' stranglehold on Lord Stanley's Cup in 1984, the Edmonton Oilers were the odds-on favorites. In the 83-84 season, Edmonton ran away with the best record in the league, and for the third straight year set a new record for most goals in a season with 446. The Oilers were led by their new captain, Wayne Gretzky, and he was once again breaking records and writing his name into the record books. That season saw the Great One score at least 1 point in the first 51 games of the season. During those 51 games, Gretzky had 61 goals, 92 assists for 153 points, which is equivalent to exactly 3 points per game. He also won his 5th straight Hart Trophy and his 4th straight Art Ross Trophy. The Oilers, however, were not a one-man band from the province of Alberta. The season's second leading scorer was Gretzky's teammate Paul Coffey, who with 126 points became the third defenseman ever to score 100 points in a season. Other major contributors were Yari Curry with 113 points and 40 goals on the season, and Mark Messier with 101 points and 37 goals. Meanwhile, in net was Grant Fuhrer, who earned a 30-10 record in 1984, who also split time with Andy Moog. The Oilers finished on top of not only the Smythe division of the NHL with a record of 51-18-15, but it also had the best record in the league under head coach Glenn Sather. In the postseason, the Oilers got past the Winnipeg Jets in 3 games, then got all they could handle with their rival, the Calgary Flames, which went the full 7 games. Then, in the Campbell Conference Final, the Oilers swept the Minnesota North Stars in 4 games to return to the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, waiting for them was their opponents from the season before, the New York Islanders, eyeing their 5th consecutive Stanley Cup. Now, the season before, the Islanders swept the upstart Edmonton Oilers, and to add insult to injury, the Islanders, not the Oilers, had home ice advantage. That year, because of a coin toss in the Wales Conference, the conference that the Islanders belonged to that season, had more points in head-to-head play against the Campbell Conference. This was also an interesting Stanley Cup Finals to begin with, in addition to the fact that this was a rematch from a season before. This was the 5th straight finals of teams that joined the NHL in 1967 or later. The Oilers, originally of the World Hockey Association, joined the NHL in 1979-80 season, and the Islanders was an NHL expansion team in 1972. Also, the Islanders' 4 consecutive Stanley Cup wins, 1980, 81, 82, and 83, and their appearance in the 84 Cup Finals, and an NHL record of 19 consecutive postseason wins that currently stands unbroken. The 84 Finals was the third of 9 consecutive finals contested by a team from Western Canada. The second of 8 contested by a team from Alberta. The Oilers appeared in 6, the Flames in 2, and the Vancouver Canucks was in 1. And the first of 5 consecutive finals to end with the cup presentation on Alberta ice. The Oilers won 4 times at home and the Montreal Canadiens once in Calgary. In Game 1, goaltender Grant Fuhrer shut out the Islanders at Nassau Coliseum, as the Oilers won 1-0 on a goal by Kevin McClellan. Yet the Islanders would rebound in Game 2, winning 6-1 even in the series at 1 game apiece before heading for Edmonton for Games 3, 4, and 5. In Game 3, the Islanders had a 2-1 lead in the second period when Mark Messier was scored to knot the game at 2. Then Edmonton would score 2 more goals, one by Paul Coffey and another by Glenn Anderson, as they headed into the third period. Then in the third, it was all Edmonton as Messier, McClellan, and Dave Simcoe scored goals to claim the 7-2 win. However, the win was costly. Goaltender Grant Fuhr was injured as Islander Pat LaFontaine crashed into Fuhr on a forecheck during Game 3. Andy Moog replaced Fuhr for the remainder of the series. In Game 4, the Oilers took a 3-1 lead in the series, winning 7-2 once again. Wayne Gretzky scored his first goal in the series, which opened the scoring for the Oilers. He would add another in the third to claim the win as they stood only 1 win away from their first ever Stanley Cup. In Game 5, Gretzky would score twice in the first period to set the tone for the game, and by the end of the second period, the Oilers were well on their way to their first Stanley Cup championship. Yet the Islanders would not go away that easily. Pat LaFontaine would score a pair of goals in the third period to make the game interesting, yet Dave Lumley would add an empty net goal to seal the deal for the Oilers and clinch their first Stanley Cup by the score of 5-2. As one dynasty ended, another began, as this was the Oilers' first Stanley Cup win and their first of 5 Stanley Cup titles in the decade of the 80s, winning back-to-back in 84 and 85, and then winning back-to-back again in 87 and 88, and their last during the 1989-90 season. The Oilers became the fastest Canadian-based expansion team to win a major sports title by winning a title in only their 5th NHL season, and also the first former WHA team to win the Cup. Mark Messier was awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy as the playoff MVP. Now fast forward 40 years. The Celtics dispatched the Dallas Mavericks in 5 games for their 18th NBA championship, and the Oilers falling behind to the Florida Panthers to force a Game 7 was interesting. We came very, very close to having a replay of 84, but to reminisce about 1984, and if I could relive 1984 all over again, I would do it, especially if we could have those gas prices back. Meanwhile, in Major League Baseball, and you sort of knew that this was coming eventually, with the proliferation of gambling sites that has inundated sports over the last several years, it was announced recently that Tupaquita Marcano, a utility player for the San Diego Padres, was banned for life from Major League Baseball for betting on his team during his time with the Pittsburgh Pirates organization. It was the first time in 100 years that a player was banned from baseball. In 1924, a New York Giants outfielder named Jimmy O'Connell was banned from Major League Baseball for offering a bribe to a Philadelphia Phillies infielder to throw the games in the Giants' favor. Late in the year, the New York Giants and their crosstown rival, the Brooklyn Dodgers, were in a tight pennant race, as usual. And the Giants were playing the Philadelphia Phillies in the final series of the year at the Polo Grounds in Manhattan. With 2 games remaining on the schedule and the Giants holding a slim 1.5 game lead on the Dodgers for the pennant, O'Connell, playing center field for the Giants, offered the Phillies shortstop Henny Sand $500 to throw the game in New York's favor. You know, make errors on routine plays or swing wide of pitches that he could hit. You know, that sort of thing. In today's money, $500 is equivalent to roughly $9,000. And to his credit, Sand rejected the bribe and promptly reported it to Phillies manager Art Fletcher, who in turn reported it to Major League Baseball Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis. Now you have to understand what a big deal this was in 1924. We're just 4 years removed from the case of the 8 Chicago White Sox players that included Eddie Cicotti and Shoeless Joe Jackson that were implicated in throwing the World Series in 1919, which was known, of course, as the Black Sox scandal. When the season ended, and by the way, the Giants split the 2-game season-ending series with the Phillies and advanced to the World Series, where they eventually lost to the Washington Senators in 7 games. When the season ended, Fletcher and Sand reported the incident to, of course, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the commissioner. After an investigation, Judge Landis handed a lifetime suspension to O'Connell and Giants coach Coxie Dolan. Future Hall of Famers Frankie Frisch, George Kelly, and Ross Youngs were also implicated in the bribery scheme. However, the charges against them were dropped for lack of evidence. O'Connell was the last major leaguer to be banned from the game, and he was born in Sacramento, California, and started his professional career at the age of 18, playing for the San Francisco Seals of the Pacific Coast League. He batted over .330 in 1920 and 21 before being purchased by the Giants for $75,000 in 1923. In his 2 seasons in the majors, O'Connell posted a .270 batting average with 8 home runs, 57 RBIs, and 66 runs scored. Coming up, we will send a shout out to one of the best played and one of the most competitive NBA finals ever. 50 years ago, the Boston Celtics back in the finals for the first time in the post-Russell era, led by the likes of John Havlicek, JoJo White, and Dave Cowens, and coached by Tom Heinsohn, faced the then Western Conference champion Milwaukee Bucks, paced by Oscar Robertson, Bill Dandridge, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The series went to full 7 games, and one of the games, Game 6 specifically, was a double overtime classic and is considered one of the greatest NBA Finals games ever. More on this series and that incredible Game 6 in our shout-out segment right here on the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, a member of the Sports History Network.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today.
And welcome back. You are locked into the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, a member of the Sports History Network. And just a reminder out there, you can follow us on Twitter at HistoricallySP2, or you could write to the show with possible show ideas, or you just want to say hi. You can write us at historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. That email address, once again, historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. This season, the Boston Celtics went through the regular season as a team on a mission. 2 seasons ago, the Celtics had a 2-1 lead in the NBA Finals against the Golden State Warriors and ended up losing in 6 games to Steph Curry and company. Then last year, the Celtics inexplicably fell behind to the Miami Heat 3-0, and despite the C's rallying to force a Game 7 in Boston no less, the Celtics fell to the Miami Heat in 7 games. Now this season, the Celtics were the prohibited favorites to raise banner 18 in the rafters at TD Garden, and they did just that. The Celtics avenged their loss from last season to a hobbled and undermanned Miami Heat team in the first round, then dispatched another team dealing with injuries, the Cleveland Cavaliers, then outlasted the Indiana Pacers, who was also without their top player, Tyrese Halliburton, to reach the finals for the second time in 3 seasons. And in the finals, the Celtics defeated the Dallas Mavericks in 5 games for their 18th NBA title. So, mission accomplished for the Celtics in 2024. 50 years ago, the Celtics were also a team on a mission. In 1973, the Celtics were the prohibited favorites to return to the NBA Finals for the first time since the retirement of Bill Russell. Along with Hall of Famer John Havlicek, a holdover from the Celtic dynasty of the 1960s, it was a new cast of characters for Boston. Along with Havlicek was sharpshooter JoJo White and center Dave Cowens. The Celtics rolled through the 1973 season with a franchise record 68 wins, but in the playoffs, Havlicek would injure his shoulder and eventually lose in 7 games to the New York Knicks in the conference finals. While the Celtics came in the 73-74 season, the Milwaukee Bucks, you could say, was also a team on a mission. The Bucks behind Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Oscar Robertson seemed to be the successors to the Celtic dynasty. After all, the Bucks dominated the Baltimore Bullets in the 1971 NBA Finals, sweeping Earl Monroe, Wes Unseld for their first NBA crown. But by the 1974 season, the Bucks were 3 years removed from their lone NBA title, with Oscar Robertson at the very tail end of his career. The Celtics were once again at the top of the standings in the Eastern Conference, despite winning 12 fewer games than they did the previous season. In the playoffs that year, the Celtics defeated the very competitive Buffalo Braves, led by Bob McAdoo, in 6 games, then avenged their loss from the season before at the hands of the New York Knicks, beating the defending champions in 5 games. And for the first time since the retirement of the great Bill Russell, the Celtics were back in the NBA Finals, their first trip in 5 seasons. Meanwhile, in the Western Conference, the Bucks were just as dominating. Milwaukee defeated the LA Lakers in 5 games, then beat the Chicago Bulls in a sweep in the Western Finals to return to the NBA Championship Series for the first time since winning it all in 1971. The NBA Finals will be carried on television for the first time by CBS. In previous years, the NBA was televised by ABC, anchored by Howard Cosell, along with courtside announcers Chris Jenkel and Jack Twyman. This would be the first of 16 consecutive seasons that CBS would broadcast the NBA Finals, and the lead announcer would be Hall of Fame announcer Pat Summerall. Yes, that Pat Summerall. He was joined courtside by Golden State Warriors forward Rick Barry and former NBA player Hot Rod Hundley. Notably, this would be the only NBA Finals broadcast by Summerall, who most sports fans know him from broadcasting the NFL along with John Madden and the lead voice of the Masters. Heading into Game 1, perhaps the biggest headline was for the Bucks would be shorthanded, as veteran guard Lucius Allen would not be available for the finals due to a knee injury he suffered during the playoffs. Without a key contributor to the Bucks' offense, the Celtics took full advantage, harassing the 35-year-old Oscar Robertson and Allen's replacement Ron Williams into several turnovers. Boston took a 35-19 lead in the first quarter and cruised to a 98-93 win in Milwaukee, despite Kareem scoring a game-high 35 points for the Bucks. In Game 2, played on April 30th, 1974, which would mark the last NBA Finals game to be played in the month of April, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar scored his second 30-point game, and in the series he took more of an active role in running the Bucks offense. Along with his 36 points and his pinpoint passing to Bob Dandridge, which led to his 24 points. But more importantly, Kareem shut down center Dave Cowens, holding them from 8 to 22 shooting from the floor, including blocking a Cowens shot at the end of the regulation to force overtime. In the overtime session, the Bucks defense continued to limit the Celtics offense, holding the Celtics to only 6 points in the extra frame and tying the series at 1 game apiece, 105-96, as both teams headed to Boston Garden for Game 3. And one of the biggest adjustments that were made in Game 3 was the decision of Dave Cowens to change his approach in dealing with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Sensing that he was no match for Kareem in the paint, Cowens decided to shoot more from the outside, and it paid off. Cowens, despite early foul trouble, scored 30 points in only 32 minutes of action, leading the Celtics to a 95-83 win to take a 2-1 series lead. Boston's defense also turned up the heat on the Bucks' offense, forcing 11 first-quarter turnovers and leading to a 21-point lead. In all, the Celtics forced 27 Milwaukee turnovers. Now, with the Celtics winning Game 3 on their home floor, little did anyone know at that point that this would be the last game of the series that the home team would be victorious. In Game 4, Milwaukee Bucks coach Larry Costello made a lineup change. With Ron Williams struggling to deal with the Celtics press and the Bucks swingman John McLaughlin nursing a sprained ankle, Costello turned to little-used forward Mickey Davis to help in the backcourt. Davis' size at 6'7" presented a matchup problem on offense for Celtics guard JoJo White, forcing Celtics coach Tom Heinsohn to go with Don Chaney in the backcourt. With that move, that freed up Oscar Robertson to be more of an effective floor leader. In his surprising new role, Davis scored 15 points and Kareem shredded the Celtics with 34 points and 6 assists from the paint. And the Bucks maintained the lead for the remainder of the game and wrestled back home court advantage in the series with a 97-89 win in Boston as both teams headed back to Milwaukee for Game 5. It was a series tied at 2 games apiece. The Celtics stole back home court advantage with a 9-point 96-87 win at Milwaukee Arena. Despite Kareem scoring 37 points, the combination of Havlicek and Cowens proved too much as each scored 28 points in the win. And they would have a chance to end the series back in Boston in Game 6. Now, it is almost a prerequisite that if you have an all-time great series to decide a league championship, you have to have one game that goes down as an all-time classic. In the case of the 1974 NBA Finals, that all-time classic was Game 6, played at Boston Garden on May 10th, 1974. It would go down as one of the 10 greatest NBA Finals games ever. Yet in the beginning of the game, it didn't seem like it would be a classic, as the Bucks would take full advantage of early foul trouble by Dave Cowens. And as the Celtics center would watch from the bench, the Bucks exploded out to an early 12-point lead in the first half. However, the Celtics would rally to force overtime by the veteran presence of John Havlicek. With slightly over a minute to play in regulation, Havlicek would connect on a jumper to tie the game at 86. On the final possession of the game for the Bucks, Oscar Robertson committed a costly and uncharacteristic error as he committed a 24-second violation as he was attempting to set up for the final shot. In the extra session, Milwaukee led 90-88 when Don Chaney got a steal and passed to Havlicek. Kareem made it back on defense and forced the Celtic veteran to pull up. Havlicek missed the shot, yet got back his own rebound and scored to tie the game once again to force a second overtime. In the second overtime period, to say the least, in a word, was intense. The lead would change hands 11 times in the second extra stanza. Bob Dandridge hit a pair of free throws. Havlicek, who had 9 of his team's 11 points in the period, hit a short jump shot from the baseline as he was fouled by Dandridge late in the second overtime. Havlicek hit a foul shot to put the Celtics up 93-92. Then, a frenzied exchange of baskets occurred with neither team leading by more than a point. Kareem hit a skyhook, then Havlicek hit a jumper. Oscar Robertson then scored the next 2 Bucks baskets, sandwiching a JoJo White jumper. Then Havlicek scored again, and on the next possession, Dave Cowens, playing with 5 fouls, committed a 6th as he fouled Abdul-Jabbar in the lane. Mickey Davis, the surprise starter from earlier in the series, put the Bucks up 100-99 with a basket with 24 seconds remaining on the clock. With the shot clock turned off, the Celtics worked for the final shot. Tom Heinsohn screamed for a timeout, but with 7 seconds left, Havlicek lofted a baseline rainbow over Kareem for a 101-100 lead. And after the Hondo jumper, the Bucks called timeout. And instead of setting up a play for Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Bucks coach Larry Costello and assistant coach, a young New Yorker by the name of Hubie Brown, decided to cross the Celtics up and set up a play for a hobbled John McLaughlin, where Abdul-Jabbar would set a pick from the high post. Now McLaughlin couldn't get free, and Davis was covered as he cut to the basket. Kareem, with the ball, moved to the right side of the lane, dribbled to the baseline, and unleashed a skyhook from 17 feet away and swished it in with 2 seconds left. JoJo White put up a failed desperation heave, and that was it. The series was tied 3 games apiece going back to Milwaukee for Game 7, and with all the momentum going in Milwaukee's favor. Havlicek ended the game with a high of 36 points, and Kareem led the Bucks with 34, including the game winner. Moving on to Game 7, 2 days after the thriller in Boston on Sunday afternoon, the Celtics relied on a game plan that had worked for them in several instances in their past to claim Game 7 wins on the road. Start off fast and explode out to big leads early. In a series where home court advantage meant very little, The Celtics decided to abandon man-to-man defense and focus most of their defensive pressure on Kareem. And despite still scoring 26 points, the change in tactic freed up Dave Cowens on the offensive end, hitting 8 of 13 from the field in the first half on his way to a game high of 28. And series MVP honors and Celtics cruise to a 102-87 win for their first title in the post-Bill Russell era. This was the Celtics' 13th NBA title and would return to the finals just 2 years later in an equally thrilling series. This is one of 6 games of the. They will win that series 2 years later in another 6-game classic against the Phoenix Suns, what most people consider one of the greatest NBA finals ever. For the Bucks, it would be 47 years before they would return to the NBA finals. And in 2021, where they would beat, again, the Phoenix Suns for their second NBA championship. The Celtics and Bucks stayed at NBA Finals for the ages, perhaps the greatest NBA Finals in the decade of the 1970s. And y'all, that will do it for this edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your day to give us a listen. This podcast comes to you from the Bill King Memorial Studio in the sports wing of TM4 Enterprises, located in suburban Atlanta in the shadow of Stone Mountain. To get more content of Historically Speaking Sports, you could also check us out on Twitter at historicallysp2, or you can send us a line at historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. And if you have not done so already, please subscribe to the show. It really helps me out. Tell your family, tell your friends, tell your neighbors. Hell, tell a passerby on the street about us if you think they like sports history. And until the next time, stay blessed, stay cool, especially in this summer heat, and be your best in everything that you do. It will make the world a much, much better place. Peace.
Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.